She's a research director in INRAE in France, and she's consulting professor of soil science in AgroParisTech. She is the coordinator of the EJB Soil program. For her research in soil organic matter, she was assigned with several awards, and she was also special ambassador for soil for the FAO. She is currently the vice chair of the Scientific and Technical Committee of the 4-per-Mill initiative.
Good morning. So it's a pleasure to me also to welcome you. Next slide, please, René. So as you know, the European Soil Strategy sets in a very relevant and timely way that an ambitious objective, that is that by 2050, all European soils are healthy. This is ambitious. This requires to be able to assess soil health, that is, to assess the actual capacity of soils to provide ecosystem services, to be able to monitor soil health, and to be able to implement sustainable management options to maintain and restore soil health. Ambitious, as I said. We addressed these challenges in our research program, the European Research Program SOIL. Can you, next slide, please? That focuses on agricultural soil management towards climate-smart and sustainable management of agricultural soils. Our program started in 2020 and associating research institutes and universities from 24 European countries. In total, we are more or less 46 research and higher education entities, and the program is co-funded by the 24 countries and by the European Commission. Our long-term expected impacts are the long-term alignment of soil-related research at the national and EU level, and to contribute to increase the capacity of the farming sector to adapt and to mitigate climate change. For that, we implemented diverse activities that can range from knowledge development, for example, stock takes, research projects. Here, one of the research projects, the Serena project, is inviting you to discuss the results, but also knowledge sharing and transfer, knowledge harmonization, organization and storage, and knowledge application. And it's in knowledge application that we positioned working at the science policy interface. So regarding to the theme of today and soil health evaluation, what we did in the HAP soil inter alia and so far was to propose definitions of soil quality and soil health, to stocktake soil health indicators being used by countries, to stocktake the available soil information, databases and maps, to stocktake and analyze and compare the existing national soil monitoring systems, and making proposals for indicators in the perspective of the Soil Monitoring and Resilience Directive. We also focused on some functions of soils and quantified, for example, the potential of carbon sequestration across 23 European countries. This is another research project. And we quantified in many projects the impact of agricultural practices on soil characteristics and soil functions. And on that, now I would like to give the floor back to Irene, and I'm glad that I very briefly introduced you to our research program.
Okay, thank you, Claire. So this is the agenda of the day, and as you can see, we really would appreciate if you are willing to share your opinions or doubts about the approach presented and the results obtained. For this, after each presentation by Sophie Cornu, we kept some time for clarification questions, discussion, and Mentimeter. Please feel free to type your questions and comments in the chat or raise your hand and speak. So now I will leave the floor to Isabelle Cousin and Sophie Cornu. Isabelle, she's a soil physicist. She works also in INRAE France in the Infant Soil unit. She has been involved in research actions regarding soil-based ecosystem services and quality for a decade. In the GP Soil program, she has coordinated the Serena project. Regarding Sophie Cornu, she also works in INRAE. She's a pedologist and she works on soil evolution and the global change. In the framework of IGP Soil program, she is the national co-coordinator for France, deputy leader of Work Package 2, in charge of writing the roadmap on European research on agricultural soils. And regarding the Serena project, she was deputy leader of the Work Package 5. Please, now, Isabelle, you can share your screen.
Okay, I think it works. Irene, is it okay? Okay, so
yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So hello everybody. We are very happy that you take time to help us in evaluating the results, our results products. And our question today is to discuss about bundles of soil-based ecosystem services and soil threats at the EU level for present time and evaluation for 2050. And we are inviting you to evaluate as EU stakeholders. So just for 1 minute to remind you what we are discussing about. So we are discussing about soil-based ecosystem services that we have defined, which is a quite general and shared definition as a contributions of soils to human well-being. We will also discuss about threats, and we have considered in this project that threats are processes leading to soil degradation. And finally, last but not least, and which is the most important for us, we are discussing today especially on bundles. And bundle is a set of soil-based ecosystem services or soil threats that appear together repeatedly in space or in time, and will follow by this the quite well-known definition of Fotsep and Herne from 2010. So our Serena IGP project was based on 3 pillars as its philosophy. So first, we have dealt with soil-based ecosystem services and threats, and our first will was to deal with look at bundles. It means to look at them together. For example, soil-based ecosystem services, to look at 2 ecosystem services or 3 or 5, and the same for threats, looking, for example, at compaction, erosion, sealing together. These are just examples. These are not exactly what we have done. But our idea was that if you, as a policymaker, you are involved in thinking about soil degradation, probably you will be interested in looking not only at one with degradation reason, but at several, for example, compaction and erosion together. So it means that we have to evaluate bundles, and this was our first way. The second is that to evaluate threats, ecosystem services, and their bundles, we need indicators. And this is not the subject today, but our idea was to think that perhaps threats and ecosystem services may be considered as the 2 sides of the same coin and could be linked by common indicators. For example, of course, erosion control as a soil-based ecosystem service can be linked to erosion as a threat, and the same for biodiversity, which conservation could be considered as a soil-based ecosystem services and loss as a threat. And finally, of course, the usual actual way of making research is not to separate scientists from the society, but to evaluate, to produce and evaluate together. And we have put stakeholders at the core of our project, and that's why we are here today. We would like to share with you what we have produced to receive your feedbacks, because you are the people who are in situation of evaluating trade-offs between some ecosystem services and threats. And we are very lucky to receive your feedbacks. Of course, as you know, EGP Soil project is finishing, and so we won't change our actual result, but we will use all your feedbacks to make our research action evolve for the next calls and the next month in research. So the objective today are to share with you the SERENA bundles maps at the EU scale for some soil threats. We have evaluated them by 2050 under contrasted climate scenarios. I will just explain them next. And also from soil-based ecosystem services for both present and 2050 by using the same scenarios as soil threats. So you will see our methods, you will see our results, and we will ask you some questions. Generally, do you find these maps understandable, informative, of any use for you, and could you give us some advice to make them to be improved? So we have dealt with ecosystem services and threats. So how did we choose them? So at the beginning of the project, we have made some consultation between the 24 institutions participating to the SERENA project. And in each country, the scientists have discussed with some stakeholders, and we have chosen the ecosystem services and threats which were considered as the most important actually for the member states. So as soil threats, we have selected soil compaction, subcloth, soil erosion, and soil sealing. And the same for ecosystem services, we have selected primary biomass production involving food, feed, fiber, fuel, wood, pharmaceuticals, biochemistry. We have also selected climate regulation, soil erosion control, and hydrological control. So, and of course, there are others which have been evaluated at some of them at the national scale, but not at the EU scale. And at the EU, we will work today only on these 8 ones. So as I said that we have used scenarios. So scenarios for land use change, as well as scenarios for climate change. So for land use change, we have used the GRC Louisa scenario, published in 2015, which proposed land use for 2050, and how the change and how there are change between actual land use and future land use, for example, agriculture to artificialization, pasture to artificialization, and so on, all the possibilities. And as far as climate change is concerned, we have used the common shared socioeconomic pathways, 2 ones selected by the IPCC. So firstly, the SSCP1 2.6, which is the most sustainable, and you have here, I won't comment them, but you have here the result in precipitation changes and in temperature changes. And we have also selected the most pessimistic one, which is the SSP5 8.5, representing the high emission scenarios by continued fuel use and mitigation efforts. And you also have distribution and precipitation changes and temperature changes. So that's all. Oh, no, sorry. And then bundles. How we will discuss about bundles. First, we will show you the indicators that we need to estimate bundles. So we will, the methodology is first to select indicators. Then the second point is to select methods that have to be used to estimate these indicators. Thirdly, to select the correct databases to estimate indicators, and then to select thresholds, and then to select a method to build the bundles. And only once we have done and shared all these 5 points, we can have a look on the maps. So this will be the following will be presented by Sophie in according to this methodology. So I stop now sharing my screen, and I will give the floor to Sophie, who will introduce you to our Founders evaluation of soil threats at the 2050 horizon.
So good morning to everybody. I'm just sharing my screen, hoping you will see properly. Have you unshared, Isabel? Because it's asking me if I
We can see your screen, but not in the presentation mode yet.
Yeah, that's pretty normal. It's just I had a strange so presentation mode, and I will try to have a good pointer so you can see it.
That's okay, that's correct, with the pointer.
Yes,
also.
thank you.
So you see it properly? Yes?
Yes, you can go on.
So we will start with bundles of soil threats at the EU level for 2050. So as Isabel said, what we first need is to select indicators to estimate these bundles. And if you look at the literature, many indicators exist in the literature for the different threats we selected, which is here soil organic carbon loss, here erosion, here compaction. You see in extreme case, you have almost one indicator per study. The only threats for which you can have a type of agreement is here for erosion, where many studies use soil loss by water for estimating erosion. So why do we have this situation? First, because the different indicators may represent different parts of the process. If we can take back erosion here, you can see that some indicators are representing erosion by water, some are representing erosion by wind, but you can also have erosion by tillage or by harvest or by a combination of the different. Here you have a combination of all the process, or one or two of the process, like water and wind, water and tillage, or all of them together. So that's a first reason why we have different indicators. A second reason is the indicator can be representing either the potential or the current soil threats. So you have this example here with an indicator which is a current indicator of erosion by water with the soil loss by water, or an indicator which is a potential indicator of water erosion by inherent erosion risk. You have the same thing here with wind erosion. Another reason is the indicator can be representative of a different step of the driving pressure state impact response cycle, or of the cascade framework. So if you take here the example of soil compaction, here you have an indicator that will indicate more pressure, here that will more indicate the state of the soil, and here the impact. To be noted that we define threats as a process, and none of these indicators are indicating the process in that case. The indicator can also represent either a threat that is a process, like here, or a state of the soil that would be more the soil health than the soil threats again. And as you can see here, two maps for erosion, shear potential and current. So with two different indicators, and you end up with rather different vision of the threats at the European scale, where you see that here you have a strong potential and here too for wind erosion that you don't really see here when you take the current erosion by wind. So it really gives you different information. That's why it's very important to make choice, sounded choice or choice that are compatible when you want to build a bundle. So what do we did in Serena? We choose for soil organic carbon loss a change in soil organic carbon stock. For soil erosion, soil loss by water. So we reduce soil erosion to water soil erosion. For soil compaction, we use the change in topsoil bulk density, and soil sealing, a change in the proportion of soils being sealed. So since 3 of these indicators are changes, that means we need 2 dates to evaluate them. That's why we just evaluate them for the future, because we didn't have 2 dates for present or recent past and present. And one more thing, we indeed use changes to have evaluation of soil processes and not soil state. So now we selected indicators, we need a method to estimate them. So once again, in the literature, you have different types of methods. So direct measurements, but you see they are rare and they are only for erosion. At the use scale, I have to make sure that it's clear that all this literature was at the use scale. Sometimes you have expert knowledge, but most of the time you have numerical assessment by either rule-based model or statistics. That is very important in the case statistical or empirical equation. That is very important in the case of erosion, or process-based model. What we choose is to use Russell, which is an empirical equation very often used to assess erosion at the European scale. But for soil organic carbon loss and soil compaction, we decided to use a digital soil mapping approach, which are also statistical approach, despite the fact that rule-based models are more often used for compaction, for example. Now, to be able to assess the indicator with the method, we need to select soil database. And we thought that since we wanted to build up bundles, we needed to have the same database for all the soil threats considered to avoid to add bias due to different biases of the different soil databases. So you can see here that we need different type of input data for the different indicators. So we need soil data for 3 of them. We need land use, mainly for soil sealing, but also for erosion. We need climate for erosion, and we need topography for erosion again. In the literature, several databases are used. So if you take soil data, the most commonly used is the SDAC database. If you take land use, you can see that Corin land cover is often used. But in reality, we couldn't find existing assessment of the different threats using all the same databases. So we redid our estimation of the different soil threats at the European scale using for soil grid, for climate WorldClim. So we choose WorldClim because it had scenarios for 2050. Louisa for land use, for the same reasons and climate, it had this estimation for 2050, and Copernicus for topography. now we need thresholds. In the literature, for some threats, threshold exists. It is the case for erosion and for soil sealing. So we reused these thresholds. But it was not the case for compaction and soil organic carbon loss. So in that case, we made our own classes of changes. And we considered that due to all the hypotheses used in the model, a difference that is less than 10% to the present situation could not be considered as difference. So wasn't no threats. And then depending on the considered threats, above or below this 10%, so an increase in compaction more than 10% was a threat with 2 levels of threats for compaction, and a decrease for more than 10% was a threat for soil organic carbon loss. Now we need to select a method to build up the bundles. So what we did is a cluster analysis. So the principle is here you have a 2D space with 2 threads only, but the principle will be the same if we have the 4 threads. You have the intensity of the different threads, and the idea is we use a cluster analysis called k-means that groups all the point pixels that have the close soil threat level. So here you see it has cluster in three groups. So we did that for the 4 soil threats. The advantage of this method is that the soil threat information is available. The limitation is that it needs a complex interpretation of the cluster based on expert analysis of the bundle composition with heat maps. And it is difficult to compare different dates. So in this case, we had just one 2050, so it was not a problem. So now we can look at the map. So first, I present you the legend of the map for you to follow. So we got 20 bundles with this approach, with 3 bundles that where soils did not experience or will not experience really soil threats between now and 2050. They are represented in green. A group of bundles where the soils will experience only 1 soil threat by 2050, represented in blue. One group represented in yellow and orange, where the soil will experience 2 soil threats, and one group where they will represent 3 soil threats. And here you have the proportion of the European soil territory that will experience these bundles. And now the map. So here you have the map for the first scenario, the most favorable. And here you have a comparison of the most favorable scenario and the worst here, and you can see that there are some changes in expanding the orange here, for example, so where there are 2 threats. And you can also see that some bundles that were existing in scenario 1 are not encountered anymore in scenario 2, but with new ones that were not encountered in scenario 1. So I will stop here to let you the floor by first asking question for comprehension, and then going to the Menti, which code is here. Maybe someone will put the code in the chat so it will be easier for you to connect on the Menti and answer question from the Menti. I will unshare my screen and we come back later with the rest of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Sophie. So yes, in the chat, there were a few questions. I saw Isabelle was answering. So now we have another question from Emmanuel Petel. Please, you can switch on your microphone if you wish and your camera.
Yes, thanks, René. Just some question about my understanding, some reaction, because I'm not aware about all database, and I was a little bit surprised, but to know better on Louisa, because for me it's a completely new wording, and the same for SOILTHREATS, because I am more familiar with Corinne, or I'm more familiar with Lucas, but I'm not so completely familiar with this new mapping database, I would say. The first question.
So in fact, we use Louisa that provide projection for 2050, which is not the case of Corinne Landcover. That's why we used it. And for SOILTHREATS, we used it because some information that are completely necessary to estimate our indicators, like, for example, bulk density, are not available in Lucas. I'm not sure I answered your question. But... And SOILTHREATS, in fact, is based on the sampling point of WOS, which is a international soil database, and it's extrapolated with DSM approach.
Maybe DSM approach, I don't know if it's
Digital
clear.
soil mapping, sorry.
Okay. I think Emmanuel had a second question, maybe?
No, because after, yes, as we got the mapping, I was very impressed by I would say, the granulometry, and the sense is very localized. It seems to be a very accurate at the regional level, and I don't know how you manage that, because for me, I'm very impressed by this map.
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, and that's important, that the resolution is 1 kilometer. But the resolution of SOILTHREATS is lower, but since we didn't have such a resolution for all the parameters, we use a 1 kilometer resolution.
Okay, thank you very much, Sophie. If Emmanuel has no more questions, we have from Arvin Jones. He was also chatting, but please, it's nice if you wanna speak, actually.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. I had 2 points really in the chat. One was the fact that by, let's say, excluding the other forms of wind erosion, perhaps you're having a slightly distorted perspective, especially for those areas maybe in sort of northern Germany and Denmark, as you pointed out, where arguably because of the terrain, wind erosion is actually the dominant sort of erosion process. And then the other point I just wanted to make was that indeed in Lucas we have more than 6,000 bulk density samples, and I also put into a chat a geospatial layer that was developed out of that. So maybe that's something to consider in the future. Thanks a lot.
So yes, we are aware we are just using water erosion, and that's a limitation of what we have been proposing. I'm not sure that the bulk density data were available when we started the work.
Yeah, possibly. It's from last year, early last year, that the data was made available.
So it was not available when we started the work. But I mean, we are proposing an approach, and it can be obviously used on different databases if the databases are improving, which they are generally. So
yeah. Okay.
Okay, so I can see that Isabel is answering in the chat. I don't know if you want to describe better some concepts. You can take the microphone again for a minute.
Okay, thank you, Irene. Yes, I answered a couple of questions. They were about the indicators and the way we have chosen, for example, indicators for the erosion. And I answered that we had in another part of the project discussion and reflection about what are the best indicators or what are the most easy to use and how we can choose an indicator regarding this this usability, this the way it can be interpreted and so on. And I have put the reference in the chat. There was also a question regarding the collection of the indicators and what are the most important ones. For me, the most important one is bulk density because it's critical for evaluating stocks. And it means that in our work, we have, of course, used models to evaluate bulk density, but it is the main challenge for the coming monitoring systems at the EU and national scales. And of course, it's already, as Arwin said, measured in the Lucas system at the moment. And there was also a question regarding, sorry, several ones. Yes, we made a mistake that Mirko has seen about potential and real evaluation of erosion. So sorry for that. And I will keep on answering the question when you are dealing with humanity. So
Yeah,
thank
okay.
you for all your questions. We do as we can, as quick as possible.
Okay, so we can go now through the Mentimeter. So the code is, so if you go on menti.com and the code is 1930-1033. So there is a first slide, which is just the title, and then the first chapter for the questions. So the first question was, are soil threats bundles of interest for your practice?
Irene, can I add something? We asked for the people from EGP Soil
Yes.
not to respond the Menti because it is an external evaluation of the work. So please, people who participated to EGP Soil, please don't reply the Menti.
Yeah, thank you, Sophie. Sorry if I didn't mention. So from the first questions we received, it seems that soil threat bundles are very interesting for your practice as policymakers or scientists or consultant for policymakers. So I can see that for the moment, yeah, people are still answering. Okay. So maybe while you're taking the time to access Mentimeter, I will go to the next question, which is, are these maps understandable? And for now, it seems that the answer is yes, which is good. Okay, so I can still see people are still answering. The next question was, are these maps responding to needs you have? At the end of the Mentimeter, you can express maybe a bit more about your answers. For example, here partially is the dominant answer, so maybe you want to explain why. The next question is, are projections for 2050 of any use for you? Again, the answer is partially. Are the chosen scenarios meaningful for you? Again, partially. Some people don't know. And some people totally, yeah, more people now. They think that the scenarios are very useful or meaningful, actually. Are the differences between the scenarios projections readable for you? It seems like it is not very clear for most of the people, so maybe if Sophie wants to explain at the end of the Mentimeter, maybe can help for the next sessions. The next question was, is bundle a good option to explore the complex patterns of spatially interacting processes of soil degradation? And even here there are some doubts, but less than maybe in the previous slide. If bundles are not a good option, what are other options that you would consider more efficient? And here, this is an open question. We already started to get some feedback. Maybe Sophie or Isabel, if you want to comment.
Yes, I just read the answer regarding the choice of bundles. So the answer, the comments here about the
I can answer on the IPCC scenarios, maybe. Yes, we could have done 3 scenarios with an intermediate one, but as a matter of fact, you can see, or maybe not have seen, but already the differences between the 2 most extreme scenarios is not that big. So I'm not sure it would have been, I mean, on a theoretical point of view, it would have been interesting. But seeing the difference between the 2 most extreme, it might not have been so informative. Yeah, about the term of bundles, it might not be very easy to understand for general public. Maybe we could use the term of association, but association is broader than bundles.
There is also a comment about our terminology, and in fact, we can also say that in the frame of the Serena project, we have proposed some definitions at 2 languages level. What we call the scientific language and what we call the plain language, and our definitions have been translated in plain language in 11 languages in all our MS participants in our project, and then in each country we have sent questionnaires so that we receive feedbacks from stakeholders from our definitions. There is a deliverable of the project on this, and I will put in the chat the reference so that you can see how the scientific definitions are evaluated by stakeholders. And as you say, bundles was not the best concept to be understood by stakeholders and public. And there is also another comment regarding the fact that we have looked at bundles and not on actions. Yes, for sure. But our objective was to let people be conscious that several threats can occur together, and that perhaps this is a way of looking at bundles, could be a way on choosing what would be the best locations where somebody has to take actions, but action was not directly our objective. Our objective was to focus on the locations where actions have to be made. I know that Eduardo would like to
I wanted to add something, Isabelle, on that point. I wanted to remind you that we are working at the European scale in this part of the project, not all the project, but at that scale, we didn't really had databases on soil management practice with a resolution we could use. And so indeed, we took into account land use, but not soil management practices. It doesn't mean that we think they have no action on soil degradation, which would be ridiculous saying that. It just means we didn't have the data for that.
Okay, so Isabelle, you were commenting, I think something from Eduardo. Do you want to comment?
Eduardo would like to speak, I think.
Okay, maybe at the end of the Mentimeter?
In the chat.
Okay, so maybe we just finish the Mentimeter and then we let him speak?
Okay.
Okay. So the next question was, the provided maps are giving the same importance to all the soil threats considered. Do you agree with this approach? Most people said no. If not, to which soil threats would you have attributed more importance? And at the moment, most people selected erosion as the main threat, let's say, to give more importance to.
Yeah, I would ask why, because at the same time, some countries, when we have been asking the stakeholders, thought that soil thinning was the most important threat. So, and soil thinning is a more drastic or damaging threat. So why erosion?
Maybe someone wants to answer. You can open your microphone and answer to Sophie.
Perhaps I can comment that this result is not, perhaps at the EU scale, most important threat could be erosion, but at the national scale, when we have asked the member states, the first one was, the most important one was soil organic carbon loss, and then soil erosion, the third carbon loss, second erosion, third compaction, and fourth was drought. Drought and soil thinning was about the same, and so then we have selected stealing at the EU scale.
Okay, so the next question was, among soil threats, do you think that a very important one is missing in the analysis? And the main answer is biodiversity, followed by pollution.
Perhaps we can comment about this biodiversity miss. Yes. Of course, it's of a high importance for each country and even at the EU scale. The question was, what would be the right indicators for evaluating biodiversity at the EU scale? When we started the project, it was not that evident, and especially because there was another EGP soil project, which is Minotaur, which focuses especially on biodiversity and biodiversity indicators. So I think that now, 3 years after the start of the project, biodiversity can be correctly evaluated by some indicators. But at the beginning of our work, we thought the biodiversity indicators were not the best ones. So we decided not to use them. And once again, loss of biodiversity, when we asked the member states to make a hierarchy between threats, they put loss of biodiversity at the 6th place and not at the top. But in 3 years, probably things have changed.
Okay, thank you. And the last question was if there are any other comments. One is thank you. And then 2 more comments if you want to answer before we move to the next presentation.
So about the fact that always need a holistic approach, we definitely do agree with that point. That's why our idea was to try to look at bundles, and at what we think would be the main threats. But I personally completely agree. If we do not look at some threat, it can become the main one because nobody is done to propose mitigation or remediation actions for that threat. So that's a very important point. And so, did we consider losses in ecosystem services? Yes, we could say in a way yes, by considering that threats and ecosystem services in some cases can be the two faces of one coin. So when we are dealing with erosion control, in fact, we are dealing with the loss of the ecosystem erosion control. When we are looking at stock loss, we are looking at the loss of at the decrease of the ecosystem service organic carbon conservation. So for some of them, they are equilibrated, but for others not, especially, of course, for soil sealing. Okay. Is it the end of the Menti, Christine? Irene, sorry?
Yeah, this is the last question. So I asked Sophie to start with the new presentation before, but we have to leave the floor to Eduardo, who had a question.
Yes, Eduardo, please, and then Emmanuel, please.
I just wanted to know why you were focusing right on bundles, which has the risk to overemphasize the interaction. I mean, the final result, which should be highlighting the hotspots all over Europe, so it seems to me that it is more related to the number of interaction of presence of different threats rather than on the real gravity of the risks themselves. So the approach itself is nice below an knowledge point of view, but it's not relevant for a practical point of view because from one side, it excludes very important threats like drought, flooding, mass movements, which are very important. And on the other side, is not tuned according to the real agricultural systems which are in place. So the result is somehow misleading, in my opinion, because of the methodology of usage and also because of these bundles which are overemphasizing the interaction on the real process which are real affecting the the, areas. So this was my question.
Sophie, do you want to answer or?
I'm not sure I can totally understood the question, because in fact, what we did was, okay, we didn't take all the soil threats. That's yes, it was also for question of feasibility. But then I'm not sure. The bundles is more a kind of co-localization than really interactions. So I'm not sure I understand the second part of the question.
Perhaps, Eduardo, if I understood well your point. So firstly, we do think that we should not look at bundles alone. We first have to look on the individual maps of each threat or each ecosystem service, just to check if it makes sense, and then only then after to look at the maps. So here it was just the question of evaluating if looking at bundles makes sense. And then, if I understood well your point, you said that we will focus on interactions between processes, and for me, it's not a drawback; it's an advantage. We have to look at where processes are occurring so that they lead to the most critical zones to be degraded. So I would say it would be more an advantage than a drawback.
Yeah, but we don't really look at the interaction. We look where they occur together, which is a bit different.
Yes, this is a local co-occurrence, but using the model that we have used, we did not look exactly from a scientifically based point of view at the interactions, because the models were independent.
Yeah, more or less. But that's another discussion, because we took into account a certain level of interaction.
Yes,
that I have described here. But in fact, the bundle, the way we build up the bundle is not considering the interaction, is only considering the fact that the threats are present or not together at one point. And I'm not sure why you said we are not considering real because we just have agriculture and we didn't detail the type of agriculture. Was that the point?
For instance, you didn't consider the different agricultural system or forestry. So, for instance, it is difficult to understand from your maps the role played by the different agricultural systems, which are the most important drivers of the threats. So it is just a picture of the results coming from different modelings, rather than a picture coming from different realities.
Yeah, but I have to make clear that we are projecting for 2050. And so we don't have this information for 2050. We would love to have it, but it's not available. And at the beginning, we wanted to do the exercise also for the present situation, but the problem is because the soil threats is a process, so we need 2 dates for soil information, and we didn't have them. We didn't have a map, let's say, of the soil condition in the 80s, and now a map of the soil properties for let's say 2020. With the soil monitoring system, the coming soil monitoring system, and with Lucas, we will have that in future, and we will be able to apply that on these databases in future. But for now, we also were limited with the data we had. And one point that we should stress is okay, we need data. We cannot provide you all these indicators and all these threats if we don't have data and we lack data.
So to be not too late, I suggest that
Yes.
we give the floor to Emmanuel Petel for a short question, and then we will move on to some subsequent. So Emmanuel, please.
No, but maybe I will, because I'm a little bit confused on the fact it's only a projection, because I expect to have something about the present situation, because for the policymaker, we need to at least to know the present situation. And for me, yes, I'm very, I'm very, say, not pleased to have something to be able to localize the need and maybe the spirit of your work. And okay, I will stop there because not to prolong the discussion.
Okay, it will be different from ecosystem services. Don't be afraid.
Yeah. Maybe just Sophie, there were doubts about the scenarios that you presented, so these were not very clear or readable. I don't know if you want to explain briefly again, or we move to the next slide.
Well, as I have understood it, it was not about the scenarios, but it was on the results of the scenarios that the difference were not so clear. And in fact, they are not so big, but I can come back to. In fact, they are not so big, but you can see here some progression compared to here from bundles with 2 soil threats, and you can see that here too. And you can see an increase in red of the bundles with 3 soil threats. And to our point of view, if you have to deal with only 1 soil threat or several soil threats, it is possible that you won't do it the same way, because probably there are trade-offs to be considered when you have several soil threats, or synergy among the threats, or trade-off. And so maybe it's a different way to combine them. So that's what we thought it could be interesting, but you can agree with that. I don't know if I answer clearly.
Okay. Yeah, maybe you can go to the next presentation. Thank you.
So now the idea was to look at bundles of soil-based ecosystem services at the European level, and this time it was possible to produce map for present and for 2050. I don't know why my mouse is not working. Okay. And so again, you will see it's the same principle. We first need to select indicators. And so there are, again, a lot of indicators in the literature for the different services we choose. So I remind them, it's climate and regulation, including carbon sequestration, hydrological control, erosion control, and biomass production, with two subparts for hydrological control, but we will come back together on that together. So on top of the reason I already expressed for having so many different indicators for the different soil-based ecosystem services, there is one that was not encountered for soil threats, which is that, and I will illustrate it for climate regulation and carbon sequestration, is that the indicator may represent different parts of the ecosystem. So here you have all what is in orange brown, which is in fact evaluated only on the soil compartment, while all what is in yellow is evaluated taking into account soil plant compartment, so more complete integration of the system. And so that leads to very different soil indicators. Sorry. Again, we did choices. So for primary biomass production, we use potential net primary production. For soil erosion control, we use soil not being eroded by water, again, only water. For climate regulation, we use net ecosystem productivity. For water production, we use water yield. And for flood control, so in fact, hydrological control was divided in two, water production and flood control. And so for flood control, we use the water storage capacity of the soil. So you can see from here that there are indicators that are based only on soil, while this one was more defined like a difference of precipitation minus evapotranspiration, so it was more climate. So we can see from here that the climate may have more or less impact depending on the ecosystem services chosen. So again, we need a method to estimate the indicators. Again, measurements. So we have a bit more of measurements than for soil threats here in the literature at the EU level again, sorry. Not much of expert knowledge, and again, a lot, or not at all expert knowledge, sorry, a lot of numerical assessments with either rule-based model or process-based modeling. So what did we do? We used the results provided by dynamic global vegetation model for climate regulation and carbon sequestration and for biomass production. We used a statistical approach or empirical regression, which is Russell, for erosion control. And for hydrological control, we used digital soil mapping for flood control and a simple equation, which is precipitation minus evapotranspiration for water production. So again, we need now the databases. So like here, like for soil threats, we evidence which type of data we need for the different indicators. So you see soil data for flood control and for soil organic for soil erosion control. Interestingly, despite we are looking at soil-based ecosystem services, there is no need of data for the three other indicators. Land use only for soil erosion control, biomass for primary production and climate regulation, climate for soil erosion control and water production, and topography for soil erosion control. Again, in the literature, you can see that, for example, for soil data, there are a lot of databases used, and the most commonly used is, once again, the SDAC1. For climate, there is also a lot of different databases, but for example, for the 4 considered ecosystem services, there is no climate database that has been used for estimating all the ecosystem services. So that led us to, again, choose our own database that were the same than for soil threats, so soil grids, World Climate, LUISA, and Copernicus. Now we again have the problem of how to threshold that, and we don't have threshold available in the literature for ecosystem services, soil-based ecosystem services, sorry. So what we decided was to consider, so here you have, let's say, the distribution of intensity of the ecosystem services at the European scale, and we considered that considering all the uncertainty due to our approach, when you are around the median, plus or minus 10%, European median, It's not neither high nor low level of services that is given by the considered soil, so the pixel. When you are above from 60% to 100% in percile, when you are in this zone, that means the pixel is giving a higher, or the soil in the pixel is giving a higher level of services than the median of European soil. And here, when you are below 40, and this the percentile below 40, it means that the soil contained in the pixel are giving a lower level of services than the median of European soil. So based on that, made for the present situation, we could define values of services of soil-based ecosystem services for each soil-based ecosystem services, and we applied this threshold for the current situation and for 2050. We were based on an approach that was already used in the literature at different soil scale. I want to make sure that it is clear for you that it means that the level of ecosystem services, whether it's high or low, depend more on the soil qualities than on the soil health, because it's not related to one soil type, but to the median of European soils. That's very important. Now we need again to select a method to build the bundles, and because of the limitation that were mentioned for SOILTHREATS, we choose a different method, which is a scoring method. So the principle is, so you have here the different soil-based ecosystem services, and as I told you, we have 3 levels, or you are at the European median, or higher or lower. And for each services, we counted 1 when it was lower, and if you had 5-1, so you had 5 to mean all the soil-based eco services were at a low level compared to the European median. But you could have a few 10, which means you are at the median, and a few lower. In that case, we had 1 to 5 services at low or moderate level, and you had different situation, 1 at moderate and 4 at low, or 5 at moderate. But you could have 1 at high level here with a different amount of median and lower. That gives you the orange part. 2 at high level with various situations, again for moderate and low. Or 3, 4, or all at high level. So it's a scoring approach where we just count the number of services that are at low, medium, or high level, affecting them a number. The advantage of this approach is it is simple to interpret, and it is easy for comparing different dates. The limitation is the soil ecosystem service information is lost, because you can have, when you have 3 median, for example, it can be this one, or this, and this one, or it can be this one, that one, and that one, and it will give the same scoring. So you don't know which are the soil ecosystems, the soil-based ecosystem services that are medium, low, or high. Now again, we can look at the map. So I already explained you the legend, and I won't come back on that. And you can see, so I remind you here which are the ecosystem services considered. And you can see here places with very high level of all the services, or higher level than average. It's you can see here, basically in the mountains generally. Conversely, with very low level compared to the average, it's mainly in Mediterranean countries. But you can also see places where you don't have you have either a low or a moderate level of different ecosystem services. You have that here in Spain, but also in France here and in the Northern European countries, etc., etc. I think that now again we have a Menti, and that's for the present situation.
Yes, I can see that there were many questions, but Isabel is answering to all of them. So I will go to the Mentimeter now, because anyway, at the end of the Mentimeter, there is an option to put some discussion again.
I am sure.
So I will share my screen. So here is the new chapter of the Mentimeter. So bundles of salt-based ecosystem services at the EU level for present. So only one map was presented. So the question is, was this map understandable? So the Mentimeter is the same code. You just have to go to the next slide. So at the moment, 4 people replied, but they all understood the map. The next question is this map responding to needs you have? And like before, it's always the most, the most frequent question is partially. Let's see if more people reply to the previous one. Yeah, okay, so for one person at least, the map was not really understandable. And yeah, it partially responds to needs that attendees have. The next question is the information on the diversity and intensity of soil ecosystem services at EU level useful for you? And it seems yes, more or less. The provided map is giving the same importance to all the soil ecosystem services considered. Do you agree with this approach? Most people agree. If not, so if you don't agree with this approach, to which soil ecosystem service would you have attributed more importance? And again, erosion control is very high, even if we received only 2 answers so far.
I think that it's important here to see that biomass production is not at the top level and even not on a high position. So erosion and food regulation, climate change, I would say, anyway, regulation ecosystem services are at the top instead of provisioning service, which is I think interesting for us, and yes, especially because in each vessel we are focusing on agricultural soils. Yes, it's interesting to see that even by focusing on agricultural soil, regulating ecosystem services are at the top of the interest.
Okay, and then among soil threats, do you think a very important one is missing in the presented analysis? And you have drought, human health, pollution, biodiversity loss, and flooding.
It's not threats, it should be ecosystem services. It's mistake of this.
Yeah, here. So no thresholds exist in the literature for soil ecosystem services. Do you agree with the approach proposed? And some people don't know, but some people do not agree. So then we have the last question, so maybe, which is an open question about extra comments. So maybe then if Sophie, you want to reply on this approach that you and your colleagues have chosen for the threshold before going to the next presentation. And here is the 3 comments that we received about the approach that they would suggest.
So basically, we thought that we might be wrong, but we thought that it was not to the researcher community to define the threshold, because it is a matter of political decision on a larger sense. I mean, what do we want for a level of services? And so we had 2 options, which were either to do the approach that we are doing, which is providing a level of diversity of soil-based ecosystem services for different soil in Europe. Or there was another option we have tested, and we stopped with it because it was too complex and not interpretable from our point of view, which was to define soil units, like in the sense of the soil monitoring law, and for each soil unit to define, let's say, a percentile of services provided by the given soil units, and then to say we are above or below the median, or above or below, I don't know, the 75% or something like that. And then it was more, in our initial idea, it was more related to soil degradation. But in fact, it ended in maps that were totally understandable. There was no pattern, and so we gave up this approach.
Okay, thank you. I can see that Mirko Barbero raised his hand, so maybe I will stop sharing my screen, and we will, please, Mirko, you can speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, you can keep the screen if you want. It was also there. So thank you very much. Very, very interesting for the discussion. Unfortunately, I was not able to fully understand the colors in the map. I see that there is something which is too complex for me, or I need further examples or clarification. Anyway, when you say it's up to the policy to define the threshold, I think there is a true part. But for example, there are factual needs that could be also identified by science. The example of the water retention. So let's say the policy part could say, okay, we accept this kind of flooding every 20 or 50 years or 10 years. This is the political decision. But then, yeah, it would be important to know whether for example, this every 20 years would correspond to 80% of the maximum ecosystem services provision, or 50% or 30%. So what is critical? And not just the top, because maybe critical could be at 80%, but then there are important decisions to be taken, because we need almost top performance for that. And the same for stocking soil organic carbon or absorbing, and probably the same for food production overall in Europe. And so there are, let's say, levels. There could be a dialogue between the policy and science. Need to come to a actionable map, which really shows where we have big troubles and we need action or not. Because what I miss in that map is, for example, is the black bad enough to take action, or is the maybe the other colors are good enough to stay quiet or not? You see, but I understand the complex. So yeah.
I will reply. There are two. Thank you for your interesting comment. Indeed, I was not precise enough. It's not to the politics and when I say politics was also decision society or what we choose. Indeed, it's not politics alone, but it's not us alone either. So that's why we didn't choose limits, because it has to be a dialogue, and I completely agree with you. It has to be done in co-construction. And now coming back to this map, what it tells you is some soils, because here we are really speaking about the soils or climate, let's say, for certain indicators, provide a large diversity of ecosystem services at a higher level compared to the European median. It doesn't make, and that's why I said it's more speaking about soil quality and not soil health. It doesn't mean that the soil are healthy, and so you won't have to remediate. I mean, what do you will remediate a podzol that has a very low capacity of storing water? It's just, it's nature, but it's just saying this part of Europe is providing this diversity of services, and that part, this diversity of services. It's not saying they should provide more. I mean, that their capacity to provide these services. And that's what is this map saying, because once again, when we try to say, okay, it's maybe because the soils are unhealthy or things like that, we could not understand the map at all at that scale.
Yeah. If I may, thank you very much, because indeed, once that this is clear, and I should correct myself, then what would be interesting for us is taking the quality as a given. How much are we decreasing those, let's say, potential by reducing the health of soils, so by degrading them? Because that's where we can act and take action. So, okay, we cannot change pot soils, but we can make them healthier and avoid that the decrease in provision of ecosystem services is critical. Because, I mean, we have got used to the quality. What we are not getting used maybe is to the decrease in health. I don't know what you think.
So maybe it's a very nice transition to the next part of the talk, but maybe Emmanuel wants to ask something before.
Perhaps may I add something also to the remark of Mirko? I think I completely agree with you. So the point was, when we wrote the proposal of this project, it was in 2021. Perhaps the links between quality health, ecosystem services, and threats was not that clear. I think that in the last 3 years, either in the frame of the EduPSR project or in the frame of on other EU or national projects, we have improved what we are meaning by threats, ecosystem services, health quality. And if we if I wanted to rewrite the proposal today, perhaps I would focus more on health and quality, as you say, and more on health and quality, as you say, and less on ecosystem services. But anyway, try to make the link by considering that looking at ecosystem services like we have done, as we have done in this project, is a way of evaluating soil quality and looking at the results of soil threats, and in a way at the level of degradation that soil could have in the future, could be an evaluation of the future soil health. So I think that linking ecosystem services with quality on the one hand, and linking threats, so degradation with health in another hand, is the trick to link everything. But it was not our initial ideas, and so that's why today it may appear as a little bit frustrating. But now, if I think again to this from a conceptual vision of what we have done, I would say this: ecosystem services is quality, threats, or even degraded level is health.
Okay, Emmanuel?
No, for me, I'm a little bit. I didn't. I would say I need to reflect on better what you present, because it's very technical and I have some expertise. But just after, how to use this work and how to communicate with a community, because as Mirko said, we need some say to act, and we need to have a conviction when we need to act, and it's a part of the discussion today with the farmer community. There is a lot of resistance, and for different reasons, for different drivers, but at some stage it's important to have some relevant tool and to explain, to have a capacity to explain where we are and what is the risk for the future. And the risk of the future is, for our side, is biomass production and at some stage food security, and is a key word, because today we put emphasis of the water issue, but we need to put emphasis as well on the soil issue. But it's more political discussion, I think.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if Sophie, you have something to answer, or we go to the next presentation because we are running a bit late.
But that was you or Isabel who commented that it was really surprising to have biomass productions ranked so low in the Menti. And so we totally agree that biomass production is really important.
Okay, so if you want to share again your screen.
And
okay.
yes, because now we are indeed going to see the future, so it might partially respond some of the comment of Mirko and Emmanuel. Sorry. No, I was here. So that was the present situation. And now you can see always still the present situation here. And then here the two scenarios. So up is the most optimistic scenario, and down the less optimistic or the worst scenario. We use the same thresholds than for the present scenario, and what you can see is some red dots, which are and black, which are the places where you had the lower level of soil ecosystem services disappear, and the general level of ecosystem services is increasing almost everywhere in the most optimistic scenario. And that is due to an increase in, I will remember, in production, biomass production, and so, sorry, I'm going back to the, I have to go back to the list. Biomass production and climate sequestration, climate regulation. mainly. Probably that's due to an effect of increase in biomass in the models. Oh, sorry, the Menti shouldn't be here. And when you go to the worst scenario, you see that you are not so different in the southern part from the present situation, a bit less, but you have an increase of level of service in the northern part. And again, it is due to an increase in the biomass production due to higher temperature, where temperature is limited. So now, again, a short Menti.
Yes. So there was a comment in the chat, but I think Isabel will answer. So I will share my screen. So the Menti is the same, you just have to go to the next chapter. So are projections for 2050 of any use for you? So it seems partially, as like before. Are the differences between the projections readable for you? It seems now it's clear. No, not so much. And then we have just other comments. If you want to type or if you want to raise your hands, please feel free. Maybe while waiting for comments, if Isabel wants to answer to the comment I saw from Eduardo. Well, if we don't get any more comments, maybe I will stop sharing. If I get some echo, okay, here we go. Okay, Sophie, would you like to answer?
Yeah, no, but this is one of the limitations of the approach, clearly. As mentioned, that we don't know it's a global, it's a scoring, so we don't lose the track of which service is increasing, soil-based ecosystem services is increasing or decreasing. And we are well aware that's the limitation of this type of approach. We have to look at them together with the maps of the services. But today we really wanted to focus on this bundle approach to try to see if it was of interest or not for you.
Another comment? Sophie, maybe to answer this question, you can share again your screen to show the maps.
Yeah.
So just the comment was about Sweden.
The chat, I cannot answer the question from Eduardo linking reduce to improve to reduce erosion. Perhaps it's an old question. I don't know. Sorry.
I think it was about the scenarios. But anyway, maybe now, Sophie, can you answer the comment about Sweden, which looks like a worse soil ecosystem services provision in the more optimistic scenario than
as I said here, what's happening here and so here too is that the biomass production is not that high, and because of the increase of temperature, you have a higher biomass production in the model. That's what the digital vegetation DGVM are predicting. And that's the reason of this increase of level of service. It's mainly because of that, because of the biomass and the climate carbon storage impact, climate change regulation. But the two services that are increasing in these zones more under SSP 5 than under SSP 1. And probably due to this limitation due to temperature. And in this part, I mean, you, if I'm not wrong, sorry, I'm scrolling back to the scenarios to make sure I'm not saying, sometime out of memory, it's not that easy. Yeah, here. You see that you have an increase in temperature in this region, but you don't really have a decrease in precipitation. So with more higher temperature and still a higher amount of water, you have a higher production, biomass production. And that's what is reflected in the results.
Okay, the person who wrote the comment agrees with your interpretation. Okay, so there is a question from a comment or a question from Emmanuel, and then we can skip to the last short presentation of the day.
Just to come back on the model, and because okay, you spot on the temperature, and okay, maybe water availability, and is after you have a link with biomass, but today we have maybe it's only a period, but we have too much rainfall, even in some more Nordic country. That mean it will affect as well as the biomass. But okay, maybe it's not completely considered today. But,
not completely considered indeed, and also what we get with the model is an average increase of precipitation over the year, and that is well predicted. What is not that well predicted with the climate model is the distribution. And for many of the soil-based ecosystem services or soil threats we are looking at, the distribution has a very strong importance, and that's the most difficult to predict, in fact, in the climate change. And the way we took it into account, in fact, we used mensural data, so we don't take into account extreme events. And that's a limitation. And even more than that, when we, for flood control, was it for flood control? For flood control, oh, I always get confused. Sorry, I have to go back to make sure I... Yeah, for water production, we just have a global index on the year, so we don't take into account of the extreme event, neither of the distribution throughout the year, which obviously can be a problem because you may increase the runoff if you have all the rain concentrated on a short amount of time, and then the precipitation, less evapotranspiration might not be so good as an indicator. That's a limitation for sure. And for flood control, you can see it's only based on the soil water storage capacity, and soil water storage capacity is not moving in the model. It's not changing. So yes, it is part of the limitation, but it is also part of the limitation of what we know and what we are able to model at this scale. Yeah, I know it may sound very disappointing.
Okay, so Sophie, maybe you can skip to the take-home messages presentation.
Yes, also take-home messages, as you said. So that's our vision of what we think is important to remember. First, a bundle map is a model. I think you got the point very clearly by seeing your comments. So it is not reality, and that's one of the drawbacks for you, very clearly. And it is subject to uncertainties, and that's very clear. What is very clear also, or what should be very clear, that it has to be interpreted considering the step used to build it, because we could get very different maps taking other steps, using making other choice in terms of indicators and in terms of threshold and things like that. And again, it is very important to not confuse what is a soil threat, which is a process, which is what we have been evaluated, and what would be soil health, which is a state. And with that respect, we were making a comment on the soil monitoring laws that there might be possible confusion on that, because if you look at soil erosion indicators is indeed soil erosion rate, so ton per hectare per year, which is the equivalent of what we are proposing. But when you look with subsoil compaction and soil organic loss of soil organic carbon, what is suggested are more state of the soil, bulk density in subsoil, or soil organic carbon content, or even and so they are more an indicator of the state of the soil, which is soil health, than soil threats. And I think that through the discussion we had this morning, you are indeed more interested maybe in soil health, and that's what Isabel was saying about if this project had to be done now, we would more go on soil health than soil threats, which are the processes leading potentially to a decrease of soil health. Nevertheless, we think that this approach in bundles can allow identifying zones where no threats or multiple threats are acting, and that might be important in order to take decision on how to combat them, because you may not combat them the same way if there is just one or zero. It can also identify zones that are rich in soil-based ecosystem services, diversity or intensity, from zones that are less rich, and see how it's evolved in time. And maybe it can be used to reason actions to be conducted. So once again, taking into account synergies and trade-off when you have several threats, which is not necessary when you just have one. So the perspective we see to this work are to associate uncertainty maps to the actual maps. Maybe it would be worth not providing single maps like single maps of bundles like we proposed you, but an average map built up with different models, a bit like it is done with ICCP for climate. We thought that it would be very important, and that was discussed to define threshold in co-construction, because indeed we have a big problem in defining this threshold, and it is not just a scientific question, as we discussed before. And we think that if we need to hierarchize the soil threats and the soil-based ecosystem services, it should also be done in co-conception and co-construction approach, as again, it's not just a question of scientific approach, but also of choices that a society wants to have. Again, we have a Menti.
Yeah, this is the last Mentimeter.
Yeah, it's the last one.
So I will share. So this is the chapter take-home messages on the same Mentimeter. So do you agree with the proposed take-home messages? So here you have a list of the take-home messages presented. And if you don't agree, the score is 1. If you don't know, 3. 5 if you agree totally. Yeah, so it seems that the first 3 take-home messages are really welcome. The last one is a bit more, it's less, let's say, agreed with. Bundled maps allow identifying actions to be taken. And this was already discussed a little bit before.
And in fact, I think it's not a surprise for us. So bundles is a way to focus on locations, but not on actions.
No, it's not providing actions to be, but
Yeah.
it can show different areas where the situation are different, and so it doesn't give the solution of the action to be taken. It can contribute, but not as a single tool, for sure.
Okay, and the next one is, what is your general opinion on the presented work?
Yes, for sure. We have to increase the dialogue with policy, but we have started to do this in Serena. It's not that easy to find policymakers to discuss with us. We had different exchanges with stakeholders in the member states, but it was how could say, yes, very diverse. In some member states, we received lots of feedbacks from stakeholders, in other less, depending on lots of factors. So for sure, we have to be closer to policy. But an important point is that sometimes, and I think we have experienced it during the EGP soil, but it's my personal opinion, sometimes policy is going in a more rapid way than science. So when we started our work when we started thinking of to award in 2021, we were far from the soil monitoring law as it is now. And when we had access to the first versions, our work was, yes, quite strongly engaged, and we have commitments in EU projects when we are promising to EU that we will do that work and provide this deliverable and this deliverable. Definitely, we have to focus on that and change. Sometimes of course we have to adapt, but this is an equilibrium between what we can do and what we are allowed to do.
Yeah, and I really agree with the second comment, which is
yes.
we are not working on the same path.
Yes.
And
yes. Let's suppose the context move faster. Yeah.
To get results that are reliable, it takes time, and very often we are asked to get answer much quicker than we can. And also, it's not that we don't want to focus on reality, but it's sometimes we miss the data, and so there is a real need of getting data, and I'm sure you are aware about that. And that, without data, we can build up model, but we cannot get any result out of them.
And on this time difference between the policy world and the scientist world, yes, it's indeed something that we have encountered, as Isabelle and Sophie said. But we really thank you for devoting some of your time to this workshop, because these exchanges are extremely useful. Even though we are not on the same path, we're not at the same speed, we do need to connect with you to learn, orient, and to, well, update ourselves as soon as possible, and vice versa. So thanks a lot for your availability.
And I will comment on one of the comments, which is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, fifth one, which let me think I was not so clear, because for the threats, it is possible to differentiate the threats, where they are and what they are and what they are level. It is for the services that it's not possible. And I was maybe not very clear on that, sorry.
We also have a raised hand by Mirko Barbero.
Yes, just to stress, well, thank you again very much. But really, let's work together to fight the streetlight effect. So only take what exists and work on that. There are so many things where we don't have light, and that's where also we have to care for the work. But it's very hard for soil. So there we need cooperation, science, and policy, I think.
And Mirko, based on this workshop this morning, what are a few dark zones you would advise us to go to?
Well, one could be, for example, the actual erosion.
Yes.
Can we use, I don't know, satellite images of floodings to estimate the mud from, and then compare with the forecast of models, for example? And what about other indicators, subsoil compaction? Can we have a campaign of limited, maybe campaign of measurement and compare with the susceptibility, so the theoretical things again?
Okay, so comparing the estimates we're making because of models of diverse nature with the actual state of soils.
Yes, and going towards action, like for water retention at the river basin level, can we estimate what is the situation? Can we imagine what we could do? Yeah, but just the first things that come to my mind.
No, but thank you. It's already food for thought. Thanks.
So, Irene, is it the last question of Clementine? I think yes.
Yes.
Okay, so it's 12:03. So
or maybe there was
two hands.
Actually,
Armin
there
and Emmanuel.
Yeah, let's stick to the maybe raise hands, because we have another question, but yeah, maybe better to speak. Please.
Erwin first.
Yeah, well, yeah, indeed, a fascinating morning. Unfortunately, I've had to leap in and out because there's a parallel meeting going on as well. But I just wanted to ask, what's the future now of this work, given the end of EJP and Serena? Because I think you're definitely on to something, and maybe we should have an exchange with the user to see whether or not these sort of approaches can be sort of built into like a dashboard that we have on user, or whether you have similar plans yourselves to maintain this work beyond the lifetime of the Serena project.
So perhaps I answer on Serena, and then Claire, you will make some more general view about EGP. So thank you, Arwin. Yes, definitely we would like to keep on. I think there are lots of questions raising from this work. Among them, an important point I just realized today, thanks to the chat and comments by several colleagues, especially Mirko, is the streetlight effect. And there is a problem when we are dealing with different threats and different ecosystem services, but not everything at the same time. Our idea was to focus on the locations where threats are the most important or ecosystem services are the most developed. But then on the opposite, for example, when we are looking at threats, if threats are low, it could be places where we as scientists or you as policymakers would perhaps not propose actions, and it will be desert zones, and perhaps they are under threats and we don't know. So this is the question of how to deal with the locations where it seems that nothing will happen. In fact, it can happen something. That this is the effect of the streetlight. I think we have to definitely focus on. And then another point is to link ecosystem services and threats, especially those that are not the two faces of the same coin, especially to put biomass production together with other threats, and especially with fluid regulation. I think when we are looking at ecosystem services together, we are linked at using, as Sophie mentioned, some models to provide some ecosystem services, but also some other models to provide estimation of others. So it means that they are not processes that are not interlinked in the models, and we have to deal with this question of processes. And then a third idea, but sorry, I forgot it now. Yes, and now what to do? Unfortunately, Serena is finished. It was a very, very nice consortium because we were of several member states with several pedoclimatic conditions and different threats and ecosystem services of interest. And also because we have this RA package 1 dedicated to discussions with stakeholders. Of course, we could have been more. We have to improve, and this is what you said in the preceding slide. But yes, we need to have these locations where we can link more current science with policy demands, because there is always this time discrepancy between these two. So as I'm concerned, I definitely would like to keep on, but I do not have any opportunity or any opportunity to make this. But Claire, you have better idea, I hope.
Can I add something? Can I add something?
Yes.
When speaking about this area where there might not be, or there is might be a low level of threats, but something may happen. We did another work in the frame of Serena. We didn't present today because it was too much, but we tried to compare soil health areas with soil health and for a given indicator and the threats, to define those zones where maybe you don't have a threat anymore, but you are in a bad state. And that's another way of having response there, because a soil cannot be threatened by a given threat anymore because it's already too degraded. And so combining the two can be a way of seeing things a bit differently too.
And maybe, yes, on the future. Well, thanks a lot, Arwin, for this suggestion. And well, I will try to liaise so that there's a discussion between your team and the Serena team on whether, yes, it would be relevant to have such an approach for the dashboard. And regarding continuation of the research project, so Yes, well, we hope that there will be relevant topics on the next, on the future Mission Sol calls. What I think is, I know that there's a topic on the effective management options on Sol Health for next call. And I was thinking that this approach for ecosystem services might be a way to present the results, in a fairly advanced stage of such a project. But well, that's just an idea like that. But we will definitely try to help our colleagues from Serena to continue the work. And I think now Emmanuel wants to.
Anyway, Erwin has already mentioned something, because for me, as users, I'm referred to European Soil Observatory and the dashboard, and at some stage it's important to make some comparison and what would be the add value of your system, maybe to promote your system. And it's important because when we refer to the dashboard, I saw in a communication on the fact 60% of the soil is degraded, and for me, I refer to what we have on the dashboard, and some colleagues start to challenge with these figures, and maybe we need to wait to have more maybe view on some other element as you present, but after I let the expert to discuss on that, but to make some link, and there is maybe Erwin is better in better place, but there is some modeling in for Desjagri for to measure, to assess impact, or to go more in evaluation, and maybe to have some exchange with other colleagues in Desjagri on that. What will be what is the value? What is the benefit of your work to promote your work at some stage?
Thank you.
So I suppose, Irene, it's time to conclude. As Claire said, we would like really to thank you warmly for your attendance. Your feedbacks are very, very important for us, and we will, of course, publish these results as they are, but you gave us lots of ideas to keep on working on that subject, and especially improving it by better discussions and links with policymakers. And for sure, we will come back to you, and we hope we can still, yes, keep on having this type of conversation, this free conversation, just to hear your demands and your feedbacks and improve our work. So thanks again, very, very warm thank for you. And yes, I think you will have some information on the EGPSOL website, and this meeting has been recorded, and we will make it available on the EGPSOL website for sure. So,
Yes.
Thanks.
So thanks again, and see you soon.
Yeah,
Bye.
bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.